really nice to be able to see you in person today.
Hi, Ashley. I've been longing to meet you in person. I love your work for books and for readers.
Well, thank you. So I thought we'd start out with some of my signature questions. For those viewers who aren't familiar with my blog, I tend to ask these 6 questions to all of the authors I interview. They're sort of this or that kind of get to know you questions. You can elaborate as much as you'd like. Okay, so first is author you draw inspiration from.
Nancy Mitford.
Favorite place to read a book?
In bed.
Book character you'd be best friends with?
Oh, besides Vicky, my protagonist, maybe Laura in Little House on the Prairie.
Oh yes, I think we've all been best friends with her at some point in our life. Pen and paper or computer?
Pen and paper first, revising on computer.
Your favorite decade in fashion history?
Oh, the 1920s. Those bobs, those sleek dresses.
And your signature drink?
Sauvignon Blanc, sometimes on ice, which the French hate, but...
So Most English Princess came out on September 22nd. Viewers can purchase signed copies from the novel Neighbor. I'm sure there are some viewers who have not yet read the book, so could we start off with your synopsis of the book's plot?
Sure, Ashley. My book, A Most English Princess, is about a little-known member of the royal family. Her name is Vicky. She's the eldest child of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. In that position, she's 7th, and my book is about how Vicky, a very competent, very energetic, very clever girl, meets and marries her destiny, which is Fritz, Prince Friedrich of Prussia. She goes to live with him in Berlin. She takes all her English ideas with her because she wants Germany to be as democratic and stable and freedom-loving as England is. She runs up against Otto von Bismarck, who has slightly different ideas, very right-wing ideas about what Germany, the new country, should be like, and much drama ensues.
Okay, of all the women in history, why did you choose to write your first novel about Queen Victoria's eldest daughter?
Well, something about her predicament really spoke to me. I'm the eldest in my family too, and I have a little brother just a year younger than me. So I could imagine how difficult it would be to feel passed over for something because you were considered a lesser, a girl, but also because I liked the way Vicky sounded when I happened to cross her letters. She wrote, when she moved to Germany, she wrote thousands of letters back home to her mother. I started reading these and I was surprised what a modern person she was in many ways and passionate. She leapt right off the page and I thought maybe I could bring her alive for other people.
Do you remember the first time you heard about Vicky?
You know, I'm not really sure. I think I came across her first. There's a very good biography of her written about 20 years ago, and I found it in the library. I am a historian. I studied history in college, and I follow a lot of the new books about, especially about the royal family. The royal family, you know, they are always have a front seat to history. Even if they themselves are not directing things, they react and they respond and they have things to say. So I follow it and I saw this book. But you know, also Vicky was featured in the PBS show Victoria. Those people who've watched that show, she comes up as a child in the last 3 episodes. So I think that I actually was starting the book before I saw that TV show, but that TV show reinforced my interest in writing about her.
So in reading the book, it is very clear you've done extensive research. Could you walk us through what that process looks like for you?
Oh yeah, I will happily. It did start with the letters. I was directed toward the letters by an old biography of Vicky, which is called An Uncommon Woman by Hannah Pakula, but I started reading the letters. And then I thought, this is only her perspective on her life. So I read biographies of all the most important people around her. Of course, her mother and her father. There's a great new biography of Prince Albert. Then biographies of Bismarck and also her husband, Fritz, later the Kaiser. The most important book that I read, beyond the letters, was a wonderful biography of Kaiser Wilhelm, who is Vicky's son, that was written by a man named John Roll, and it's about his childhood. And John Roll had found, after the wall came down and the archives in East Germany were open, found a whole treasure trove of records about Willie, that's what Vicky called him, Willie's upbringing. And I also had those. Roll is a little critical of Vicky, more so than me, but I had those. He publishes all these excerpts from those records, which helped me bring the family life alive. Now, I wanted to travel to see the letters in person. There's a long waiting list at Windsor to see the letters. In Germany, where Queen Victoria's replies are, I was told, well, you can come, but Queen Victoria's handwriting is impossible to read. Stick to the published book. So I have mostly drawn up just the letters that have been published.
How long did your research process take?
Oh, I was researching it for about 14 months.
So I read somewhere that there are collectively nearly 8,000 surviving letters between Vicky and her parents.
Yes.
What role did these letters play in your research and then your writing process?
Well, it's really interesting you asked that, because at first I was clinging to them, and I just did things. I just covered incidents that were in the letters, and I used her language. After a while, I realized that even in her letters to her mother, she's not totally honest. We, after all, present ourselves to the world in the way that we choose, even to our families. In order to write a book that I thought was realistic, I had to think, how did she really feel about some of the very hard things that happened to her when she wasn't putting on a brave face? So the letters got me started, but then I resolved, I'm going below the surface, and I have to take a leap of imagination. And I did in many occasions. So, you know, this is a piece of fiction. This is my interpretation of Vicky. I hope it will resonate with people. And I hope historians won't hate it. I stick to the facts, but it's my take. It's got to be a take, right?
Right, of course. There is an extensive list of characters at the beginning of the novel. When I first saw that list, I was like, oh gosh, I need to read all of this. And then I promptly forgot it all, of course. As I was reading, then I would go back to that list, which seems to be what it was really intended for. But how did you keep track of all of those characters in your head?
First of all, I want to say, I hope you didn't think it was the wrong thing to do to put the list in. It's just for what you said. It's just for reference when you're reading along. You don't have to memorize the list. Some people have told me they're a little intimidated. You know what, Ashley? I spent hours, and I have notebooks full of the family trees of Fritz, of Vicky, of their children, of Queen Victoria's children, of who Queen Victoria's children married, all the way down to our present queen and Prince Philip, who are third cousins. So it's very hard to keep track of because they also all have the same names. There may have been 12 Fritzes in my in my family trees, and really innumerable Victorias. So sometimes I had to refer to my own notes to keep track.
Were some characters more difficult to bring alive in your writing than others?
Yes, and in one case I had an argument with my editor. Vicky's mother-in-law is called Princess Augusta, and Princess Augusta, took credit for the match. She always wanted Fritz to marry Vicky, even though she didn't really like Vicky, but she thought Vicky would be a really good person to have in the German royal family and to have in Germany to influence the development of the country, because Princess Augusta was a liberal, like Vicky was. But when I have Vicky in Berlin living, Vicky reports to her mother that Augusta is not very nice to her. So that's really how I had Augusta, kind of just always a kind of snipey mother-in-law. My editor, who's named Lucia Marco, she knows a lot about royal history, and she said, I think your portrait of Augusta is one-dimensional. Please go back and look at your research again, do some more reading. Can't we make Augusta a more round character, not just a flat mother-in-law kind of trope? And so I did that on her advice, and I think you saw Fritz's mother sometimes making some very wise remarks. I hope you noticed that.
I did. But Vicky and Fritz are really at the center of the novel, of
Yeah.
course. What is the most interesting thing you learned about those two in your research?
You know, the thing that really struck me the more I read about the two of them was how, like a lot of modern couples, they complemented each other psychologically. Vicky was short and kind of round like her mother. She always worried that she wasn't really desirable. What man would really want her, despite her high status? And Fritz was really smitten with her from the moment he saw her. He thought she had a great personality. I think he thought she was really cute and fun and beautiful. And so he did that for her. And on the other hand, she did a lot for him. He came from a kind of a broken home. His parents didn't get along at all. They were always arguing. And when he came to meet Vicky again when she was 15, he saw what a wonderful family atmosphere Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had created. Sure, they argued and squabbled sometimes, but mostly they were all very affectionate and loving with each other. And that was the way that Vicky always treated Fritz. She thought he was wonderful and she admired him and she treated him with constant affection, and she always put his feelings first, even when she didn't really want to, like in this scene that comes up for those who read about the abdication of his father. So I was just struck that perhaps good marriages through the years, through the centuries, are like that. The couple has to complement each other psychologically.
Yeah, Queen Victoria's relationship with her husband is pretty well known that they were very much in love. So I was happy to see that Vicky also married for love. That made me, I didn't know much about Vicky, and that made me really happy. I would love to hear a little bit about Vicky's wedding and when she got married.
Vicky got married in February 18D8 when she was 17 years old. Her wedding was a big deal in London at that time. It was a celebrity occasion. Her mother, Queen Victoria, wanted her daughter's wedding to be as much like hers had been, but there were some important modifications. It did take place in St. James's Palace, and they rode on a long procession from Buckingham Palace. She was wearing, Vicky was wearing a beautiful tiered dress, heavy with lace. And the first photograph of a royal wedding is really the photograph of Vicky and her parents before they set off for the chapel. It's included in my book. And then Vicky and Fritz went on their honeymoon to Windsor Castle.
So Claire, we get a pretty broad picture of Vicky's family, but can you tell us a little bit what her family was like?
Well, you know, it was a remarkable family in many ways. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert both had lonely childhoods, and they were determined to have a very warm family atmosphere. And then Queen Victoria turned out to be very fertile, so they had 9 children in all. But they organized them so they're all very well educated. They did a lot of fun things together as a family. Prince Albert built a special house, Osborne House, on the Isle of Wight, and then later Balmoral in Scotland, as family getaways. The family was very tight and warm together, and in fact, Prince Albert had this wonderful portrait done of the whole family when they had 6 children. It was a little annoying for Vicky because she is down in the right-hand corner and her brother, the heir, is up higher, but this portrait, which hangs now in Buckingham Palace, is a great testimony to their warm family life.
Is there anything you learned about one of the characters that you wanted to include in the book but just couldn't find a way to fit it into the story?
Yes. There's a very difficult part of Queen Victoria's family history that involves hemophilia. She herself turned out to be a carrier, and one of her sons, Leopold, had hemophilia. And Vicky did not have, was not a carrier. None of her children had hemophilia, her sons, nor were her daughters carriers as far as we know. But her sister Alice was a carrier, and her second son had hemophilia. And I wanted to tease this out because, unlike many people in the family, Vicky looked into it with doctors and scientists to try to understand. They had limited knowledge, but other people in the family want to pretend it wasn't there. But Vicky wanted to know the truth and try to help her nephew. And listen, the book is already 500 pages long. There was no more room for this, but I will, if I write a sequel, I'm going to put it in.
It seems to me Vicky wanted desperately to be a good daughter, a good wife, a good mother, but sometimes these roles were a bit at odds with one another. Which role do you think she was most proud of?
I think she was most proud of, that's a really good question, Ashley. I think she was most proud of I think she knew that she was a good wife for Fritz. I think being a daughter involves so much duty, and you know, she had to, both of her parents were always trying to impose their ideas on her. And while she was kind and she would nod along and accept what they were saying, it wasn't really a two-way street. She and Fritz developed a really great partnership, and as a modern looking woman, I think she was proud of that. I think if you put a gun to her head, she would admit that her mothering was flawed. She was so anxious for her children to be perfect that she could never let them just be. And I think in her older years, she reflected back on that. But, you know, she was a mother for the first time when she was 18. So there was a lot of pressure on her and to produce these perfect children. So I give her a pass, but I think she was a much, much less successful mother than she was a wife.
What were your own feelings towards Vicky as you researched and then later wrote about her? Were you impressed by her? Did you feel sorry for her?
My number one thing about Vicky is I think she's very brave. She's, and throughout, she, I think I would have been much more daunted by the kind of forces that gathered against her than she was. Certainly, she would sometimes feel discouraged. She rarely felt sorry for herself. And that's what I liked the most about her. Sometimes I wanted to slap her because she would say and do things, especially around her children, that just weren't constructive. And sometimes she lacked empathy for how it would feel to be her child. And so who among us is perfect? But she did, and she would sometimes sometimes she didn't read rooms well. She was always the first person to express her opinion. Sometimes she might have had a little bit more influence if she had stepped back a little bit, but that was not our dauntless Vicky. She sailed into situations. So, you know, like all of us, she's human, good parts, bad parts.
I think brave is a great description of her. I'm thinking back to the beginning of the novel when she had to leave home at such a young age. Not had to, I shouldn't say it like that, but she left home at such a young age, and she really did her best to hold her own in a different country and a different family.
Yeah, a family she didn't expect to be so hard.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about Vicky?
The biggest misconception about Vicky is that her life was a failure. Lots of people like to say, oh, well, she and Fritz only occupied the throne for 99 days, and she was a crummy mother. Even Sigmund Freud said she's a crummy mother. Okay, you can look at it through that frame, but then you fail to realize that this is a transitional person, a transitional royal person who went from a rather traditional background in England, and then in Germany, she moved with the times, and she tried to advocate for things that were really important in the second half of the 19th century. The education of women, which she was the founder of many schools in Germany, and especially for the education of women after the age of 14. She was very prominent, of course, in the society, and for her to say, listen, women should be educated in high school and get to go to university or university-like settings. She did that. She also established a huge nursing corps. She was very interested in the care of the sick, especially those who were wounded in war. And the final thing was that she was an art patron in Germany, and she made a lot of difference for the development of modern art. So in that way, you know, I don't think we can, it's very easy for us to say, well, a royal person who doesn't get to be, maybe rule for years, or her children love her, thus her whole life can be thrown away. She did good in her life every year that she lived, and especially important in the 1880s, she spoke out often against anti-Semitism that was growing in Germany. She was an early person to say, this is just no good and shouldn't be part of our society.
I'm going to shift gears here a little bit, because in addition to the book, I also like to talk to authors about their writing process. You spent most of your writing career writing nonfiction as a newspaper reporter and then a magazine editor. So why the switch to fiction?
I've always wanted to write fiction from the time I was certainly a teenager. However, I felt that I didn't have anything to say, and I didn't feel very confident about my skills as a writer. And that's why I went into reporting, because I thought newspaper reporting was a great way of being a writer without having to be a fiction writer. And also, newsrooms are a lot of fun. And so working with other people on newspapers was really fun. And then I moved to magazines because magazines are a big part of our culture, or they were. But as of about 3 or 4 years ago, the magazine business really went off a cliff. There wasn't the same kind of money to spend on magazines. They didn't have the same kind of staffing. So I decided to take a buyout from my company, Time. And then I thought, okay, Claire, no more excuses. Give it a try. And so that's why I started looking for a subject and embarking on my book about Vicky.
So you have a degree in European history. I have a degree in fashion history. So as historians, I know that we are trained to seek the facts. What was the most difficult part about switching from nonfiction to fiction?
The most difficult part is to be presumptuous enough to imagine how somebody else is thinking. So we all, after all, we only live inside our own head. We can only imagine what's going on in somebody else's head. There's no way to check it. But if you want to write a novel about somebody, you have to be in their head. So for me, the most difficult thing was to go where no facts exist. It's all imagination. I had to presume that I could make a good stab at what Vicky was thinking.
Earlier, I asked about your favorite place to read. Do you have a favorite place to write?
Yes, I really actually prefer to go to the library. And that's why COVID has been hard for me, because I can't go to the library. I wrote this book when we were living in Manhattan, and there's a wonderful library on East 79th Street in New York City. And I used to be there every day, rain or shine, cold or hot, standing by the door, waiting for them to open at 9 to run up to get the carol that I thought was my lucky carol. And that's where I wrote the book.
What does your process look like from the first spark of an idea to submitting your first draft? Are you a planner or a pantser, as they say?
I start pantsing, and I pants in the beginning. I start to write and think about things, and then I go back to the research and I look around and I go down deeper into some things that my writing has suggested. At a certain point, I write an outline of the whole project. But I am not one of these really smart people who start with an outline. I have to do a little writing and go back and forth, faffing around with the research, and then I can write an outline.
So I'm going to ask you to kind of put your teacher hat on. What advice would you give an aspiring author?
A couple things I think are really important. A lot of people are capable of being good writers and writing things that people will want to read. The most important thing about being a writer is writing. So you have to write every day, or close to every day, and make it like piano practice or a workout. Set yourself some goals. I think 500 words is a great goal, and start writing. I do not think that you have to do all your research if you're writing historical novels up front. You could start with a character, you can know a little bit about them, then you could start writing, and don't feel like you have to write exactly the way other people do. On the other hand, look very carefully and study the work of other people's novels that you like, especially the way they structure them. When do they introduce certain pieces of information about the characters? How do they get the action going? How do they keep it from slowing down? I actually do, in a very nerd-like way, outline other people's novels, because that helps me. It shows where the threads are that I need to keep going. I got this advice from the late, great American writer, Tom Wolfe, who was I was friends with him, and he admitted that he too wrote outlines of novels that he loved.
Claire, I hear you have a connection to the St. Louis Library. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, my wonderful husband, Mark Laswell, grew up in Creve Coeur. And his parents used to, their Jean and Charles Laswell, they used to come to the library all the time. And so when I told him about this, he wanted to remember those great times at the St. Louis County Library.
Oh, I love that. I also have great times at the library in St. Louis. So I love that we have that connection. Tell your husband hello for a fellow Missourian.
I will. I was going to wear my Cardinals hat, or his Cardinals hat, but I decided it wasn't really Victorian.
Yes, go Cards. I want to end this with asking you what's next for you. Can you tell us a little bit about what your next book might be?
You know, Ashley, I'm really on the fence. I'm getting a lot of very nice feedback for A Most English Princess. And so I'm thinking, well, should I write more of Vicky's story, or are there a couple of other royal characters I love? Should I stay with the royals? Because on the other hand, I started to write a novel set in the US with mostly fictional characters, and I'm enjoying that, and I'm getting some traction. So I can't decide. I think I'm going to see if I can finish the US novel and then go back to a royal subject. But I feel very heartened that people seem to like my writing. So now I'm going to soldier on and try to finish another book.
So I want to remind everyone the title of the book is A Most English Princess, and you can purchase signed copies at the Novel Neighbor. So Claire, thank you so much for joining me. I had a great time chatting with you.
You're a great interviewer. Thank you, Ashley.